Welcome to Compose. I'm your host, Freddie Martinez, and today we'll be talking about annotated bibliographies. An annotated bibliography looks a little like this. It looks very much like a works cited page, but after each entry you have a small annotation which lets the reader know two things. 1. A brief summary of the text argument or findings. 2. Commentary where you critique or evaluate the source. So let's take a quick look at how you would make your own annotated bibliography. First, let's start with the general formatting. We're going to start by setting our font to Times New Roman, 12 point. Next, we're going to double space our paper. And finally, we want to set our page numbers by going to Format and hitting Page Numbers. And since Google Docs defaults to MLA compliant numbering, all you have to do is hit Apply. Just make sure to add your last name afterwards. Next, we're going to do the header. And I'm going to start off by providing a frame so you know what information to input here. First item is your name. Second item is your instructor's name. Third item is the class number. And fourth item is the date, written in the format day, month, year. Afterwards, you add the title, making sure that it's centered and without skipping any extra lines. Whenever we're working in MLA, we shouldn't be skipping any extra spaces between items in our work. Since our papers are already double spaced, any line skipped will produce excess negative space and will make your paper appear barren. So here's the final frame. Now I'm just going to quickly input a student. Today we will be Blanca Paredes, taking a class with Professor V, an English 1A class, and today is 31 December 2019. That way we can imagine 2020 never happened. For the title, we're simply going to write Annotated Bibliography. You may want to opt for a more specific title if you're preparing this for your own essay. So you could include the working title of your paper first, then add a colon, and put Annotated Bibliography as its subtitle. Make sure to add your last name afterwards. Now I'm going to insert our first entry. As with the standard works cited page, you want to organize each entry by alphabetical order according to the author's last name, unless you have special instructions from your instructor to do something else. Here I'm simply going to paste in a citation I have prepared. For in-depth guidelines on how to format your citations, please visit Purdue OWL or consult the MLA handbook. As it is, the entry is formatted as a simple, left justified paragraph. However, we want to utilize a hanging indent for our entries. A hanging indent is when the first line of a paragraph is not indented, but the rest of the paragraph is. There are several ways of doing this. Often what people do is they will go down to the second line, hit tab, nothing happens, so they hit enter, which creates a new paragraph, which they indent completely, and they do the same for each consecutive entry. You can use this method, though I wouldn't recommend it. It's a little janky, and the major problem with it is that you have to reformat each entry. If you have to revise anything, it's a real hassle to work with. The more efficient way of creating a hanging indent is by adjusting the indents in the ruler. You can do this by going to this little blue arrow and dragging it to the right by 1/2 inch, and then dragging the little bar over the arrow back to its original position. That way you have a proper hanging indent, and each time you start a new entry, it will already follow the correct formatting. Next, we're going to add the annotation. Again, I already have something prepared, so I'm just going to paste it in, but we'll discuss it a little bit more in depth in a moment. Now, when you add your annotation, you do not want to start a new paragraph or skip any lines. You want to write it in directly after your citation, like so. Again, here's where the citation ends, and here's where the annotation begins. Now, what do you need to include in each annotation? An annotation is composed of two main sections. The first section presents the main argument or findings of the source, while the second section provides commentary on the text. I'm going to highlight those sections so you have a better idea of what's going on in the annotation. Here is the summary. This is a transition sentence. And this is the critique. Let's read through it quickly. Here the student writes, Ambrosius and Valenzano claim that in recent years there has been a shift in the post-apocalyptic genre, particularly within the zombie apocalypse subgenre. They argue that the genre has shifted from a leftist critique of capitalism and consumer culture to a skepticism of science, religion, and the government. In this skepticism, the heteronormative nuclear family becomes the most valuable institution. Again, here the student is briefly summarizing the paper. The point here is to inform the reader of the main idea of the text. Note that you do not want to dedicate too much space to the summary. You want to be as concise as possible, only addressing the central argument. Or, if you are working with a scientific study, this is the part of the annotation where you would state the paper's findings. You want to keep this down to 1 or 2, maybe 3 sentences at the most, depending on the complexity of the thesis. The next section is the critique, and this really is the most important section of the annotation, and as such, you want to dedicate as much space as possible fleshing out your thoughts on the text here. Now, there are different ways to approach the critique, different things you can talk about, and this will largely depend on your instructor's requirements. You may evaluate the source, in which you discuss the reliability or limitations of each entry, or you may analyze the source, where you discuss its meaning or implications, or you may justify the source and explain how it relates to your own work and how it is shaping your thinking. And if you notice, that is what this student is doing here. They write, while Ambrosius and Valenzano are discussing The Walking Dead in particular, much of what they argue can also be said of The Last of Us. Their assertion that the heteronormative nuclear family is valorized in contemporary zombie texts is crucial to understanding the role queer people, women, and people of color play in the post-apocalyptic genre. It can help explain why it is that Riley, a queer black teenage girl, Ellie's romantic partner, is never mentioned in the main narrative and dies before the narrative begins. We only know of her existence through supplemental narratives outside the main game. Notice what they're doing here. First, they pivot away from the source that the authors are writing about in their essay, The Walking Dead, and focus our attention to the object of their study, The Last of Us. They are telling the reader these are the ideas which Ambrosius and Valenzano bring up in their discussion of The Walking Dead that are helping me better understand The Last of Us. So we know now that they will be applying Ambrosius and Valenzano's insights to a new text. Again, this is just one way to approach the annotation, but I hope it gives you a good idea of how you can apply this structure to your own work. In closing, I'm going to paste a few more entries so you can get a full picture of what a more complete annotated bibliography would look like so. Notice again the hanging indent throughout, here, and here, and so on. That's about it for annotated bibliographies. They're not overly difficult to write, but they are very useful because they help you think about sources more deeply. Until the next time.